A lie spoken under oath can fool a courtroom for a moment, but it can never outrun the truth forever. The federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta stood beneath a gray morning sky as attorneys hurried through security checkpoints carrying thick case files, while reporters gathered outside, hoping another routine hearing might produce tomorrow's headlines. Inside, polished marble floors reflected the overhead lights, and the quiet murmur of conversations echoed through long hallways lined with courtroom doors where lives, careers, and reputations would soon depend upon words spoken under oath. Courtroom 7 had filled earlier than usual. Members of the public settled quietly into the gallery, while legal assistants organized exhibits, court reporters tested recording equipment, and the jury waited behind closed doors for instructions. Every chair seemed occupied. Every whisper carried unusual weight. At the center of the room sat Officer Tyler Brooks in a dark blue dress uniform, his polished badge catching the morning light each time he shifted in his chair. He appeared confident, almost comfortable, as though he had rehearsed every answer long before entering the courtroom. Across the aisle, seated alone beside defense counsel, was a black woman dressed in a charcoal business suit with her natural curls neatly pulled back. She wore no visible government credentials, no insignia, and nothing that suggested authority beyond quiet confidence. Her name was Vanessa Carter. She rested a leather notebook on the table before her, her posture calm and composed despite the dozens of curious eyes watching every movement she made. She neither spoke nor reacted as Tyler briefly glanced toward her before looking away again. The courtroom doors closed softly as the bailiff announced the judge's arrival. Everyone stood together until the judge took the bench and invited the room to sit. The atmosphere changed immediately. Conversations disappeared. Pens stopped moving. Even the air seemed heavier beneath the solemn responsibility carried by every person inside the courtroom. Tyler was called to the witness stand first. He walked confidently toward the wooden railing, raised his right hand, and took the oath in a clear, unwavering voice. After confirming his name and position, he settled into the witness chair and folded his hands neatly before him. The prosecutor began with routine questions about dates, assignments, and official reports. Tyler answered each one without hesitation. His confidence seemed to grow with every response. Members of the gallery exchanged quiet glances as he spoke with absolute certainty, presenting himself as a dependable officer simply explaining the facts. Vanessa never interrupted. She simply opened her notebook and wrote several short observations in careful handwriting before lifting her eyes toward the witness stand again. Every answer Tyler offered seemed to receive her complete attention. She did not shake her head. She did not whisper to her attorney. She only listened. Imagine sitting in that courtroom, watching someone swear to tell the truth while wondering whether every sentence was leading farther away from it. The judge remained expressionless. The jury entered and quietly took their seats. Tyler leaned slightly toward the microphone before answering another question about the events under investigation. His words came smoothly, confidently, almost effortlessly. He described Vanessa as though she had interfered with an official investigation and suggested her actions had created unnecessary confusion for responding officers. The prosecutor nodded while organizing another exhibit. Across the courtroom, Vanessa calmly closed her notebook, folded her hands together, and looked directly toward Tyler for the first time since the hearing began. Her expression revealed neither anger nor fear. It revealed only patience. Then she quietly whispered 4 words to herself, so softly that no one else could possibly hear them. Everything is being recorded. At that moment, not a single person inside the courtroom realized that the most important witness had not yet truly begun to testify. Vanessa Carter remained perfectly still as Officer Tyler Brooks continued answering each question placed before him. The courtroom had settled into the familiar rhythm of formal testimony. Every statement was captured by the court reporter. Every exhibit was marked carefully before being handed to the clerk. Every member of the jury watched the witness stand with complete attention, believing they were witnessing nothing more than another experienced police officer explaining events from memory. Tyler spoke with remarkable confidence. He described his investigation in precise chronological order, referring to official reports, radio transmissions, and conversations with fellow officers. Each answer sounded polished, almost rehearsed, leaving little room for hesitation. The prosecutor appeared satisfied, occasionally nodding while moving methodically through a stack of organized documents. From the public gallery, several reporters quietly filled notebooks with quotations they believed might become tomorrow's headlines. Across the courtroom, Vanessa listened without interrupting a single word. She opened her leather notebook once again, making only brief handwritten observations before looking back toward the witness stand. She did not write after every answer. Instead, she seemed to wait for specific moments, recording only certain statements while allowing countless others to pass without comment. Her attorney noticed the pattern but asked no questions. Years of working together had taught him that Vanessa never documented anything without a reason. The judge occasionally glanced toward the witness before returning to the case file resting on the bench. Courtroom deputies remained motionless near the doors while sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long reflections across polished wooden tables. The entire room felt suspended between silence and expectation. Tyler continued describing Vanessa as someone who had complicated an active investigation through unnecessary interference. He insisted that every decision he made had followed departmental policy and that every report he submitted accurately reflected what had occurred. His tone never changed. His confidence never appeared to weaken. Imagine sitting in that courtroom, hearing every sentence delivered with absolute certainty, while wondering whether confidence alone could make something true. Vanessa quietly closed her notebook again and folded her hands together. Her expression remained composed, revealing neither disagreement nor approval. She simply observed. She noticed the exact wording Tyler chose whenever he referred to timelines. She noticed which questions he answered immediately and which required a brief pause before responding. She noticed how often he glanced toward the prosecutor instead of the jury. Small details. Ordinary details. Yet experience had taught her that investigations were often solved not by dramatic discoveries, but by careful attention to moments everyone else considered insignificant. Tyler then described an encounter that placed Vanessa at the center of the controversy. According to his testimony, she had deliberately misrepresented her involvement and attempted to influence the direction of the investigation. Several jurors exchanged thoughtful glances, while one reporter underlined a sentence in bold ink. Vanessa did nothing. She simply reached toward the glass of water resting beside her notebook and took a slow sip before placing it back exactly where it had been. Her calmness contrasted sharply with the growing confidence on the witness stand. The prosecutor asked one final question before pausing. "Officer Brooks, are you testifying today that every statement you have made before this court is complete and truthful?" Tyler answered without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely." The courtroom fell silent for a brief moment. Vanessa slowly looked toward the digital evidence monitor mounted beside the judge's bench, then toward a sealed evidence box resting near the clerk's desk. She knew something almost no one else inside that courtroom understood. The most important evidence had not yet been introduced, and when it finally appeared, every confident word spoken under oath would be measured against something far stronger than memory. It would be measured against the truth itself. The prosecutor thanked Officer Tyler Brooks and took his seat, clearly satisfied that the testimony had established a convincing narrative. For several quiet seconds, no one in the courtroom moved. The judge reviewed a page of handwritten notes while the jurors remained focused on the witness stand. The soft clicking of computer keyboards from the media section blended with the faint sound of the courthouse ventilation system, creating the strange stillness that often settled over important trials. Tyler leaned back slightly in the witness chair, his shoulders noticeably more relaxed than they had been when he first raised his hand to take the oath. He believed the most difficult part of the morning had already passed. Across the courtroom, Vanessa Carter remained seated without showing the slightest emotional reaction. Her attorney quietly slid a legal pad toward her, but she simply shook her head almost imperceptibly before placing one finger on the closed leather notebook resting beside her. There would be a time to speak. That time had not arrived yet. Imagine sitting in that courtroom, watching someone speak with complete confidence while knowing that another version of the same story had never been heard. The judge looked toward the defense table. "Counsel, you may begin your cross-examination." Vanessa's attorney, Michael Reynolds, rose slowly and buttoned his jacket before walking toward the center of the courtroom. Unlike the prosecutor, he carried only a thin folder instead of several thick binders. He stopped a respectful distance from the witness stand and offered Tyler a courteous nod. "Good morning, Officer Brooks." Tyler returned the greeting confidently. Michael began with simple questions that seemed almost unimportant. He confirmed Tyler's years of service, training history, departmental responsibilities, and familiarity with official reporting procedures. Tyler answered every question comfortably. Several jurors appeared puzzled by the gentle pace of the questioning, expecting immediate confrontation instead of quiet conversation. Michael then asked Tyler to explain how official evidence should be preserved during an investigation. Tyler responded without hesitation, describing department policy in careful detail. "Accuracy is essential," he said. "Every report must reflect the facts exactly as they occurred." Michael nodded politely. "And that standard applies regardless of who is involved?" Tyler answered immediately. "Absolutely." Michael thanked him and took another slow step across the courtroom before asking about body camera recordings, written reports, witness statements, and digital evidence storage. Each answer strengthened Tyler's appearance as an experienced and trustworthy officer. Vanessa quietly watched the exchange, her attention fixed not on the answers themselves, but on the consistency between them. Every sentence seemed to place another carefully measured piece into a puzzle only she fully understood. The jurors continued taking notes. The reporters wrote quickly. Even the courtroom deputies seemed drawn into the unusually calm rhythm of the questioning. Michael paused beside the evidence table and rested one hand lightly on a sealed evidence box that had remained unopened since the hearing began. He did not open it. He merely looked toward Tyler once more. "Officer Brooks," he asked evenly, "if objective evidence directly contradicted sworn testimony, which should this court believe?" Tyler answered without hesitation. "Objective evidence should always come first." Michael smiled politely. "I agree." He returned to counsel table without another question. The courtroom fell silent again. Several jurors looked toward the unopened evidence box. Vanessa calmly reached for her notebook, opened it to a page already marked with several neatly written observations, and drew one small line beneath the final sentence. She then closed the notebook once more, knowing that the next witness would not simply answer questions. The next witness would begin revealing why every confident statement spoken that morning had quietly moved one step closer to the truth waiting inside the sealed box. The judge glanced toward the defense table before speaking in a calm, measured voice. "Counsel, you may call your next witness." Every sound inside the courtroom seemed to fade at once. Jurors adjusted their notebooks. Reporters lifted their pens. Even Officer Tyler Brooks, who had appeared completely confident only moments earlier, shifted slightly in the witness chair as though trying to anticipate what would happen next. Attorney Michael Reynolds rose without hurry, collected a single sealed folder from the evidence table, and walked toward the lectern. Unlike the dramatic courtroom scenes often portrayed in movies, nothing about his movements suggested confrontation. Everything was deliberate, careful, and grounded in procedure. "Your Honor," he said respectfully, "before the defense presents additional documentary evidence, we request permission to establish the professional background of one individual already seated in this courtroom." The prosecutor looked briefly toward Vanessa Carter before returning his attention to the judge. No objection came. The judge nodded. "Proceed." Michael turned slightly toward Vanessa. "Ms. Carter, would you please approach the witness stand?" Vanessa stood quietly, smoothing the front of her charcoal jacket before walking toward the front of the courtroom with calm, unhurried steps. Every eye followed her. She carried no stack of documents, no dramatic expression, and no visible sign that anything extraordinary was about to happen. She simply walked with the confidence of someone who understood the value of patience. After taking the oath, she settled into the witness chair and folded her hands comfortably in front of her. Michael began with simple questions. He confirmed her name, educational background, and years of public service. Vanessa answered each question clearly and without unnecessary detail. The jury listened attentively while Tyler watched from the defense side of the courtroom with growing curiosity. Michael then asked Ms. Carter, during the events discussed in this case, were you acting in any official professional capacity? Vanessa paused only long enough to look toward the judge before answering. Yes. The courtroom became noticeably quieter. Michael continued. Without discussing any protected investigative details, are you authorized to identify that professional capacity before this court? Vanessa answered, yes, I am. Michael reached toward the sealed folder resting on the evidence table, but did not open it. Instead, he looked back toward the witness. Ms. Carter, would you please identify your position for the record? Vanessa slowly reached inside her jacket and removed a leather credential wallet. She placed it carefully on the witness stand without flourish or emotion. I am a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The words seemed to settle across the courtroom with greater force than any raised voice ever could. A reporter quietly lowered a pen. One juror looked from Vanessa to Tyler and back again. The prosecutor remained motionless, studying the credential now resting on the witness stand. Tyler's expression changed almost imperceptibly as he realized the woman he had repeatedly described throughout his testimony had not been an uninvolved civilian at all. Vanessa remained completely composed. She had not raised her voice. She had not challenged anyone personally. She had simply answered the question placed before her. Michael allowed the silence to linger before asking one final question. Special Agent Carter, were you assigned to an official federal investigation connected to matters discussed in this courtroom? Vanessa met his eyes and answered with quiet certainty. Yes. No further explanation followed. None was needed. The courtroom had reached the point where assumptions could no longer compete with verified facts, and everyone present understood that the next pieces of evidence would now be viewed through an entirely different lens. Vanessa Carter remained seated in the witness chair while the courtroom absorbed the significance of her testimony. She did not look toward Officer Tyler Brooks, nor did she attempt to capitalize on the surprise spreading across the room. Instead, she waited quietly for the next question, allowing the legal process to move forward exactly as it was designed to do. Attorney Michael Reynolds approached the evidence table and carefully lifted the sealed folder that had rested untouched since the beginning of the hearing. Your Honor, he said respectfully, the defense requests permission to admit Defense Exhibit 12 into evidence. The prosecutor rose briefly to review the document before returning to counsel table. No objection. The judge nodded. Admitted. Michael opened the folder slowly, removing several certified documents along with a digital storage device. Nothing about the presentation was theatrical. Every step followed ordinary courtroom procedure. Special Agent Carter, he asked, without discussing protected investigative methods, were you assigned by the Federal Bureau of Investigation to participate in an authorized public corruption investigation? Vanessa answered clearly. Yes. Michael continued. Did that investigation include reviewing official reports, sworn statements, digital records, and other evidence related to the events currently before this court? Yes. Tyler shifted slightly in his seat. For the first time that morning, his confidence seemed less certain than before. Michael walked toward the evidence monitor positioned beside the witness stand. Your Honor, Defense Exhibit 12 contains certified records establishing the timeline of the federal investigation, along with materials already cleared for presentation in open court. The courtroom technician connected the storage device while the clerk verified the exhibit number for the record. A timeline appeared on the large display. Dates, investigative milestones, document references, and officially authorized review periods stretched across the screen in precise chronological order. Michael pointed toward one section of the display. Special Agent Carter, according to these certified records, when did your investigation begin? Vanessa answered calmly. Several months before today's hearing. And during that period, were official reports submitted by Officer Brooks among the materials reviewed by federal investigators? Yes. Michael allowed another brief silence before asking his next question. Without revealing protected investigative details, were those reports preserved exactly as they were originally submitted? Yes. Every juror now watched the screen instead of the witness stand. Reporters stopped writing long enough to study the timeline. Even the prosecutor leaned forward slightly, recognizing that the focus of the hearing had quietly shifted from competing opinions to documented evidence. Michael then displayed a comparison showing official submission dates beside recorded investigative milestones. Special Agent Carter, were these records created after today's testimony? Vanessa answered immediately. No. They were created and preserved long before this hearing. Michael nodded. Thank you. He turned toward the judge. Your Honor, the defense submits that the documentary evidence establishes an independently verified timeline prepared before any testimony presented today. The judge reviewed the exhibit carefully before looking toward the prosecutor. No immediate response came. Tyler looked once more toward Vanessa, who remained exactly as composed as she had been since entering the courtroom. She had not argued with him. She had not interrupted his testimony. She had simply allowed verified records to begin speaking for themselves. Michael returned to counsel table and quietly organized the remaining exhibits. The first pieces of the puzzle were now visible to everyone in the courtroom, and for the first time that morning, every confident statement delivered under oath would have to stand beside objective evidence that had been waiting patiently long before anyone entered the courtroom. The courtroom remained silent as the certified records stayed displayed on the evidence monitor. Every date, every document reference, and every investigative milestone had been preserved long before anyone entered the courthouse that morning. Attorney Michael Reynolds allowed the jurors several moments to study the timeline before continuing. Special Agent Carter, he asked, during the course of this federal investigation, were all investigative records preserved according to Federal Bureau of Investigation evidence procedures? Vanessa answered without hesitation. Yes. Were those records maintained independently of Officer Brooks or his department? Yes. Michael nodded. And were they preserved before today's testimony was given? Yes. The answers were brief, but each one quietly strengthened the foundation already forming beneath the defense's case. Officer Tyler Brooks watched the monitor with growing uneasiness. Earlier that morning he had spoken with complete certainty, believing his version of events would remain the strongest account presented before the court. Now every confident statement seemed to stand beside a growing collection of independently verified records created months before anyone anticipated this hearing. The judge leaned slightly forward while reviewing the exhibits displayed on the monitor. Members of the jury continued taking careful notes. Even the reporters in the gallery had stopped searching for dramatic quotations and instead focused on the sequence of documented facts unfolding before them. Michael carefully lifted another certified exhibit from the evidence table. Your Honor, the defense requests permission to display a comparison between the official incident report submitted by Officer Brooks and the corresponding investigative record preserved by federal authorities. The prosecutor reviewed the exhibit for several moments before quietly responding, no objection. The judge granted permission. The evidence technician displayed both documents side by side on the courtroom monitor. The room grew noticeably quieter. Michael did not accuse anyone of dishonesty. He simply pointed towards several sections where dates, recorded observations, and documented timelines could be compared objectively. Special Agent Carter, he asked, without offering legal conclusions, did your investigation require verifying official reports against independently collected evidence? Vanessa answered calmly. Yes. Every significant statement required independent verification. And was that process completed before today's hearing? Yes. Michael thanked her before stepping away from the monitor. He allowed the documents to remain visible without further commentary. The comparison spoke more clearly than any dramatic speech ever could. Vanessa remained composed inside the witness chair. She had not interrupted Officer Brooks while he testified. She had not challenged him personally. She had simply waited for the legal process to arrive at the point where evidence could speak with its own voice. Imagine sitting inside that courtroom and realizing that the most powerful witness was never anger, Never accusation, but patiently preserved documentation that had existed long before the trial began. Tyler quietly adjusted his position in the witness chair, his attention fixed on the monitor. For the first time since taking the oath, he no longer appeared completely certain about where the hearing was heading. Michael returned to counsel table before asking one final question. Special Agent Carter, why are investigative records preserved with such care? Vanessa looked briefly toward the jury before answering. Because memory can be challenged. Evidence cannot. No one spoke after those words. The courtroom did not need louder voices. It needed only the steady presence of verified facts, and those facts were now guiding the hearing toward a place where every statement made under oath would be evaluated not by confidence alone, but by the truth patiently preserved long before the first witness was ever called. The judge thanked Special Agent Vanessa Carter for her testimony and allowed her to step down from the witness stand. She returned quietly to the defense table without looking toward Officer Tyler Brooks even once. Her purpose had never been to confront him personally. She had come to present facts, and the facts were now part of the official record. The courtroom remained unusually quiet as attorney Michael Reynolds organized the remaining exhibits. Every juror appeared focused on the evidence monitor, where the certified documents still remained visible. The prosecutor slowly rose from counsel table, requesting permission to conduct a brief redirect examination of Officer Brooks. The judge granted the request, and Tyler returned to the witness stand with noticeably less confidence than before. He adjusted the microphone and folded his hands together, taking a slow breath before answering the prosecutor's first question. Officer Brooks, were you aware that Special Agent Carter was participating in a federal investigation during the events in question? Tyler answered, no. The prosecutor nodded. Did that lack of knowledge affect your understanding of the situation at the time? Tyler hesitated slightly before replying, yes. The answer was honest, but it did little to address the growing differences between his earlier testimony and the independently verified records already admitted into evidence. Michael Reynolds stood once more. Your Honor, with permission, the defense requests one additional comparison for clarification. The judge agreed. A new exhibit appeared on the courtroom monitor, displaying a carefully organized sequence of official communications, timestamps, and report submissions. Nothing on the screen accused anyone directly. It simply showed when documents had been created, when revisions had been made, and when evidence had been preserved. Michael walked slowly toward the display without raising his voice. Officer Brooks, would you agree that accurate reporting is one of the most important responsibilities entrusted to every law enforcement officer? Tyler answered quietly. Yes. Would you also agree that every statement made under oath should remain consistent with independently verified records whenever possible? Tyler looked briefly toward the monitor before answering. Yes. Michael nodded respectfully. Thank you. He pointed toward one section of the timeline. Can you help the jury understand why this official record reflects a sequence different from the one you described earlier today? Tyler remained silent for several seconds. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Finally, he answered carefully. I cannot fully explain the difference. No dramatic reaction followed. The judge remained composed. The jurors continued taking notes. Vanessa quietly observed from counsel table without satisfaction or anger. She understood that the legal system depended on careful examination rather than emotional victories. Michael thanked the witness and returned to his seat. The judge addressed the jury in a steady voice. Members of the jury, you alone are responsible for evaluating credibility, weighing evidence, and determining the significance of every exhibit admitted before this court. You must consider sworn testimony together with the documentary evidence presented during these proceedings. The instruction reminded everyone that justice was never built upon a single statement or a single witness. It rested upon the careful comparison of all available facts. Vanessa looked once more toward the evidence monitor before closing her notebook for the first time that day. Every document had now been presented. Every timeline had been established. Every important question had found its place within the record. The truth no longer depended on who spoke with the greatest confidence. It now rested where it belonged, preserved inside the evidence itself, waiting for the court to complete the final step of the process. The afternoon session resumed with a different atmosphere than the one that had filled the courtroom only hours earlier. The confidence that had once surrounded every sworn statement had been replaced by careful reflection as attorneys organized their closing presentations. No one hurried now. Every document had been examined. Every timeline had been established. Every certified record rested securely within the official case file. The courtroom no longer revolved around competing opinions. It revolved around evidence that had been preserved long before the hearing ever began. The prosecutor rose first to address the court, acknowledging that the jury would ultimately determine the weight of every exhibit and every statement presented during the proceedings. The defense then stood and summarized its position with remarkable restraint. Attorney Michael Reynolds did not ask the jury to choose between personalities. He asked them to compare testimony with independently verified records and to allow documented facts to guide their judgment. When he finished, the judge thanked both parties and called a short recess before final instructions. During the break, the courtroom remained unusually quiet. Reporters gathered near the hallway discussing the significance of the certified investigative timeline rather than repeating dramatic quotations. Members of the public spoke softly among themselves, realizing they had witnessed something larger than a disagreement between two individuals. They had watched the legal system carefully separate assumptions from documented truth. Vanessa Carter remained seated at the defense table, reviewing a final page inside her notebook before gently closing it. Months of patient investigation had led to this moment, yet there was no celebration in her expression. She understood that successful investigations were never measured by embarrassment or revenge. They were measured by whether the truth could withstand careful examination in open court. Across the room, Officer Tyler Brooks sat quietly beside his attorney. He no longer looked toward the gallery or the reporters. His attention remained fixed on the documents resting before him. The hearing had become an opportunity to confront difficult realities rather than defend certainty at all costs. Several minutes later, the judge returned to the bench and instructed the jury with deliberate care. Every instruction emphasized the same principle. Verdicts must never rest upon speculation, assumptions, or emotion. They must rest upon credible testimony, admissible evidence, and the reasonable conclusions supported by the complete record. The jurors listened attentively before leaving the courtroom to begin deliberations. The remaining spectators slowly exhaled as the courtroom doors closed behind them. Vanessa quietly gathered her files while Michael Reynolds organized the admitted exhibits for transport back into secure evidence storage. He looked toward Vanessa and smiled respectfully. "You waited a long time for the evidence to speak." Vanessa returned the smile. "Evidence always deserves the first opportunity." Michael nodded in agreement. That patience changed everything. Vanessa looked briefly toward the now empty witness stand. "The courtroom was never the place to win an argument," she said softly. "It was the place to let the truth arrive." Outside the courtroom windows, the afternoon sunlight reflected across the skyline of downtown Atlanta, while courthouse employees continued their ordinary workday. Inside courtroom 7, every chair, every document, and every carefully recorded word remained exactly where they had been placed throughout the hearing. Yet something fundamental had changed. The strongest evidence presented that day had not been anger, accusation, or emotion. It had been the quiet discipline of preserving the truth until the proper moment arrived, proving once again that justice moves most powerfully when facts are allowed to speak louder than fear, assumption, or certainty. Several months later, the federal courthouse had returned to its familiar rhythm. Attorneys hurried through security checkpoints carrying new case files, jurors gathered in waiting rooms, and courtroom deputies welcomed another day's proceedings with the same quiet professionalism that defined every federal hearing. Courtroom 7 looked exactly as it had on the morning when Vanessa Carter first took the witness stand. The polished wooden benches reflected the afternoon sunlight, the court reporter prepared another transcript, and the American flag stood silently beside the judge's bench. Yet something had changed that could not be measured by architecture or routine. The lesson from that earlier hearing had quietly reached law enforcement agencies far beyond Atlanta. Prosecutors and investigators across several jurisdictions began incorporating additional evidence preservation reviews into training programs, emphasizing that accurate reporting, objective documentation, and honest testimony protected both the public and the officers who served with integrity. Vanessa Carter continued her work with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, much as she always had. She attended briefings before sunrise, reviewed investigative files late into the evening, and quietly followed evidence wherever it led. She rarely spoke about the courtroom that had drawn so much attention because she never considered it the most important part of the investigation. For her, the true success had been proving that patience and documentation could accomplish more than anger ever could. One afternoon, she returned to the same courthouse to testify in an unrelated public corruption case. As she walked through the hallway carrying another leather notebook, several younger investigators greeted her respectfully. One newly assigned agent asked what advice she would offer someone preparing to testify for the first time. Vanessa smiled gently before answering. Never try to become the loudest voice in the room. Become the most reliable source of verified facts. The young agent thanked her and quietly wrote the sentence into a notebook. Elsewhere in the building, new courtroom training materials reminded witnesses that testimony should always remain consistent with documented evidence, reinforcing the same principle that had guided the earlier proceedings. The lesson no longer belonged to one investigation or one courtroom. It had become part of a broader professional culture built upon accuracy, transparency, and accountability. As the afternoon hearing concluded, Vanessa paused briefly outside the courthouse steps overlooking the Atlanta skyline. Traffic moved steadily through downtown streets while people hurried toward ordinary responsibilities that had nothing to do with federal investigations or courtroom testimony. She watched them for a moment before closing her notebook and placing it inside her briefcase. Every case eventually ended. Every hearing eventually concluded. But the responsibility to protect the truth never truly disappeared. It simply moved forward into the next investigation, the next witness, and the next opportunity to serve justice with honesty instead of assumption. Long after transcripts were archived and exhibits returned to secure evidence storage, one simple principle remained stronger than every confident statement ever spoken under oath. A title could earn attention. A badge could represent authority. An oath could promise honesty. But only the truth, carefully preserved and patiently presented, could earn lasting justice. And in the end, justice did not belong to the loudest testimony inside the courtroom. It belonged to the evidence that remained unchanged long after every voice had fallen silent.